Good morning, everyone. It's Jonathan Crisp here from BarnOwl. I'm one of the directors at BarnOwl. Today we're very chuffed to have Christopher Palm chatting to us. Christopher is the acting CEO of the Institute of Risk Management, South Africa. Welcome, Chris. And yeah, I'm sure no stranger to most of you that are with us today. Christopher works closely with all risk practitioners, C-suites, boards, helping us increase the level of maturity of our risk management processes, and also then chatting to us today around the poly crisis. Obviously, as we know, our country is under stress at the moment and has been for quite some time. A lot of own goals scored by us, which is pretty sad. And hopefully, as risk managers, we can. There are things that we can do and be our best and influence and mitigate or try and solve as many problems as we can in our own environments, and maybe that just works out, for the greater good of the country. And hopefully we also see some changes and South Africa flourishes. I think there are a lot of us that are hoping for that. The presentation will be on our website as well as a recording. Everyone's muted at the moment, but at the end we'll open up for questions and answers, about 15. So Christopher's going to chat for about 45 minutes. And it's really nice to have everyone online today. We really appreciate you guys joining our info sharing sessions. And again, Christopher, thank you very much for joining us today. I know how busy you are. It's almost it's very difficult to even catch up for a coffee with you. So I realize. So over to you, and thank you very much for your time today. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks to BarnOwl for always involving IMSA and supporting IMSA. So it's great for us to be here this morning, and good morning to all the participants to this webinar. Thanks, Cheryl, for arranging it. So yeah, no, we are always delighted to share our thinking as the Institute of Risk Management South Africa. And, I'm going to just jump right in it. I'm going to just call up my presentation, and I am sure if I can just hear from Cheryl, if you guys can see the presentation.
Yes, I can see it.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay. So just for the sake of not seeing my animated face and the hand movements and all of those good things when I do present, I'll for sure just switch the camera off, unless, of course, you prefer the camera to be on. That's absolutely fine by me. I don't really mind, but I do I do get animated. You'll pick it up in the voice. Be that as it may, again, Jonathan, thank you. Thanks, BarnOwl. It's always great to share, what we are about at IMSA. And as you would know, just by way of introduction, my presentation is really centered around the South Africa Risk Report. And we've been doing this for a while now. And this is our 9th edition. And just so that you don't go, but I've seen it and it's old news, I have updated it, by the way. We've aligned the conversation at least. We've aligned with some of the more recent events. So I think it'll be worth your while to hang about and, just share some of these thoughts with us. And hopefully at the back end, we'll be able to have a conversation around some of the things that you can take away from this presentation. And of course, if there are questions, I'll do my damnedest to respond to your questions and see how I can help you with some extra learning. So having said that, of course, when we did the risk report and we moved the risk report date, I think that's critical. And the reasoning behind moving the date, it used to always be launched late January, early February, and it was because of the World Economic Forum, if you like, as well as the budget speech and SONA, State of the Nation address, that we thought if we move our report to after, it would be a hell of a lot more relevant. It would be able to already then include the WEF report. It would be able to align to the SONA priorities. And of course, to second that is then how does the budget enable the SONA? And it is with that the South Africa Risk Report really focused on the 6 priorities that the president set out in the beginning of this year. And the first one was that we were supposed to restore our energy security. The second, that they were going to fight, if I say they, I'm talking about government, going to fight corruption, growing the economy, and growing the economy in a way that allows for job creation, making our communities safer, building better lives, and then lastly, making government work. So these were the 6 fundamental drivers that were shared in the SONA 2023. And we took that and we said, given that the NDP, the target date for the NDP is 2030, I'm sure you would have recalled that. And of course, what they also then did was, and it's not widely communicated, but there was communication that said 2030 should become 2035 and so on. However, my message to you today would probably tell you that we are in bigger trouble than we think, and the inaction of addressing all of these things, it's not my term, it's a term that was used in Davos, but it's this whole idea around the polycrisis. So I'm going to try and share that with you this morning. I'm going to illustrate what I believe are the key drivers, and I'm then going to just use some examples, some really arbitrary examples that we have seen in the press over the last 2 months, maybe 3 months, if you like. And then my last little bit would be, so how do we as risk practitioners, how do we as risk professionals, what do we have to change in the way we do risk management so that firstly, we are relevant, secondly, we are timeous, and lastly, and I suppose it's an outcome of being relevant and timeous, that we are effective, that we can contribute to this. So let's get cracking with these 6 focus areas, 6 priorities, if you like. The biggest, well, there are actually 4, but we'll get to that. The risk around restoring our energy security is no longer load shedding. Absolutely not. Load shedding, as a matter of fact, should not be even considered as a risk. The reason why I say that, and I'm not saying it tongue in cheek, the definition of risk, depending, which methodology you follow, but in broader terms, it's the effect of uncertainty on objectives. Now, load shedding for sure is not a risk. Load shedding has a schedule. They tell you when it's going to happen. Load shedding is just an event. There are other risks that you now need to focus on. And at the time we did the risk report, and still a national grid failure is the next big risk within the energy security space. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I've isolated some of these risks just for a little bit further discussion. But the next big one is this whole proliferation of illicit economic activity. Now, you may say, so Chris, what is this? I haven't read the risk report yet, but for sure after this presentation I will. But what is this? If you have at all considered notions like the Zama activity in the gold mine industry, if you've looked at the way that, for example, in the Durban harbour, the harbour is really captured in as far as the loading and offloading of ships, whether foreign or national. If you look at the construction industry and you consider the construction mafia and illicit trade in our retail sector, imports from China, cigarettes, whether it's clothing, it doesn't really matter. This parallel economy that runs in our country is getting so strong. And what it is taking away is it's taking away, for example, from our tax base. It's eroding our tax base. It's eroding the public coffers. Not just that, it is also becoming a provider of jobs. So although you may have a formal jobless or unemployment rate, this illicit economy is just growing at a speed of knots, and it is impacting tremendously on our health, our safety, our ability to be able to operate on a day-to-day basis. And you will see this in your own lives. I'm not sure how often you do travel in and around Sandton, but just do yourself a favor, going down Bowling, going down Rivonia, Marlborough Drive, just do yourself a favor and count how many robots, as well as down Maxwell Drive into Sunninghill. How many robots are out, not because of load shedding, but because they have been cut down at the base and they have taken the copper cabling within that. So this illicit economy is running parallel. It is creating jobs for the unemployment. And as we know, unemployment is sitting at 36, 37%. And of course, it is also making sure that the pressures on safety, health, and security are for sure the next big risk that we face, as you'll see in a minute or two. And then the economic collapse. Now, we can talk a lot, and that is, of course, one of the other risks that we'll get to. We will talk a lot about the cost of living, of course, unemployment, as I've referred to, but the big impact on our both micro and the macro positioning of our economy is the exodus of foreign capital, foreign investment, people leaving our country on the back of load shedding, interrupted power supply, on the back of crime, the growing illicit economy, and the lack of our legal and security systems to support just the curbing, not even talking about the turnaround time around that. And I'm going to share some more detailed slides around those, but just so that you park the idea that you're in trouble. And the easiest way I can explain it to you is that South Africa has two piggy banks. One that we fill up ourselves, and one that is filled up from people outside of our borders. Now, we know that the one we fill up ourselves is empty. We know there's no money because our GDP, that's where our money comes from, is 0.1%, I think. It's close to zero. So we're not making our own money. And now, when you look at your other piggy bank, which is supposed to be filled up with people outside of your boundaries, your national boundaries, and this is called foreign direct investment, the people that have done that are moving out, and the new people that should be doing that are not contributing enough. And so in that, your macroeconomic support for the microeconomic success is dwindling. And that is really worrisome, to the point where the South African Reserve Bank, in its risk release, have now identified first what I believe is the risk, as I've articulated it to yourself, and then secondly, a consequence, or a cause, actually. My apologies, I need to correct myself. And that is to do with foreign policy, things that we say in the press around the Ukraine at the time, that we say in the press around the current war in Israel and Palestine, and so on. Is how does that impact the international view on South Africa? You may have a political view, you may not have a political view, and even if you don't have one, then it is still a political view. If you don't say anything, the international community sees that as saying something. So from an economic collapse, I hope that I've just positioned it properly. Then when you look at large scale disruption of the digitally enabled services. Now, I'm not sure if you experience this, But there are two things that I want to highlight here. The one being the cable, the undersea cable that provides South Africa with communication had been damaged some months ago, 3-4 months ago. And it was well known, it was actually well experienced for a bit. And then, of course, together with that, you have Vodacom, MTN, all the national providers of your, your internet service providers, your data networks, your telecommunication networks that have been heavily impacted by two things. One, of course, the load shedding, and two, vandalism. And it's in this space where we have identified this as one of our biggest risks. And I'm going to elaborate a little bit on that when I get to the risk around social support or social dependency. But just keep that in mind. And then the impact of climate change. The impact of climate change, I think we are keenly aware of, and we've been experiencing it on a day-to-day basis. But the one thing that we are not so aware of is the impact of inaction. Now this is quite a bit, because let me use an example. On the African continent, South Africa is the biggest polluter of carbon monoxide, as one example. In South Africa, the biggest polluter is Eskom. Now, if we are going to achieve the targets that we have committed to at the COP meetings in Davos, then of course, the quickest way to do that and to pull the right levers would be to shut down coal-fired power stations, of which we have 15, 17 if you want to count in diesels and so on. Now, thinking about this within the context of load shedding or energy security, our first priority, as we've already spoken to, thinking about this in as far as unemployment goes, as far as the extraction or the exodus of foreign capital, because now we won't have enough energy to supply the market with. If you think about that, then we will for sure be stretched to achieve action in our climate change space. So the risk of inaction, the risk of not taking action will perpetuate itself in the view of the international community. So guess what? South Africa will not be moving away from fossil fuel, or they won't be moving away from burning diesel, because we can't. We cannot contribute to even more lack of energy or an increase in load shedding. We can't contribute more to public infrastructure failure or unemployment, if you like. Because just think about it. There are cities, not cities, my apologies. There are towns that have been built around power stations. Hendrina, Kriel, Witbank, Secunda. Now, once you start closing down those fossil fuel power stations, of course, then you are directly impacting on every single one of these 6 drivers. So the risk of not just climate change, but the inaction or be perceived to have no action against climate change and not making your targets, for sure a risk in the South African context. Moving on, talking about, and this was the one where I was talking about the collapse of the social security systems. Now, again, here I need to, and I'll get to the slide just now, but if you think about our SASSA, if you think about our grant system, and you think about the dependency on how do we get payments to people, how do we process application for grants, and you consider that through the lenses of a national grid failure, where there won't be any long-term, even medium to short-term solutions to be able to have those systems up. If you look at the economic collapse, the ability to afford our national grant commitment, large-scale disruption of digitally enabled services. And again, please be reminded, I'm going to put this into a little bit more of a harsh reality when we get there. But certainly the collapse of our social security systems is indeed a huge risk, because one can imagine the impact it has on the unemployed. So 37% of our workforce, of our employable workforce, unemployed. It links to a livelihood crisis. They end up on the grant system, and then of course you don't have the grant, either by way of delivery of the grant itself or by way of funding the grant. So one can see then that from building better lives, making our community safer, you would expect that there would be social unrest, that there will be social discontent, which one can only just surmise how that would turn out. And then the last one, second last one though, that I wanted to just talk to you about is political instability, or at least geopolitical instability. Two things I want to highlight here. And I'm going to talk a little bit longer about this because I don't have detailed slides. I'm by no stretch of the imagination a political analyst. But let me say this. The first thing you have to put on your radar to start scenario planning around, to start thinking about it, and no longer as an emerging risk, but you need to do enough work to understand the risk of next year's elections. So elections 2024, what would that mean for where you come from? What would that mean for your organization? What would it mean in as far as potential outcomes? Now, if you read up on next year's elections, most political analysts will tell you it will either still be the ANC or it could be somebody else, very unlikely. But the next best likelihood is a shared governance. So in other words, a coalition governance structure. Now, when you think about it from private and public sector, both sectors, and you look at the experiences we had in Tshwane, in municipalities where they were coalition leadership, nothing gets done. It is actually just infighting, trying to upset the other or to show up the other for non-performance, because where do we want to get to? We want to get to sole leadership positions or outright leadership positions. So that's the first thing. And I suggest that you do scenario plannings around all three the potential outcomes, and add a fourth outcome that would be any one of those together with social unrest or social discontent, and to scenario play those in light of your organization strategies, so that one can already start anticipating outcomes, identifying causes, and of course then putting in risk response strategies. And the last one is really critical. You would have seen Transnet. We know about Eskom. We know about our ports. So we have road, we have rail, and we have sea transport that are compromised as far as leadership is concerned, as well as infrastructure, the physical infrastructure. Now, when you add to this whole proliferation of illicit economy, the extraction of foreign investment, large-scale disruption of our digital capabilities, the collapse of our social security, and you think about the impact it has on our public infrastructure. I've used the example of the robots. I don't know if you've seen how concrete or cement structures are broken to get to the steel reinforcement, the lights on our highways, etc., etc. And that's just the more in your face sort of examples. The bigger threats is that this failure in public infrastructure becomes a reason for the illicit economy. You cannot get your licenses renewed. You cannot get your ID or passports renewed. You can't get marriage certificates and all of those good things. As a matter of fact, you can't transfer property without having to pay bribes and the like. And when you think about that and you think about the illicit economy, if you think about why people then leave or extract their capital, these are all the risks that we face at the moment. And it's for this reason, and here's the first crux. This is where we at UMSA sat back and we said to ourselves, you know, there's such a lot of conversation about whether we're a failed state, whether we're a failing state, and more recently, in the time that we released the UMSA risk report, there was strong conversation around whether we are a mafia state. And it dawned on me that it doesn't really matter, because if we're not going to be able to do something about all of these risks and do something about them very quickly, then it doesn't matter which state you tag us on. We're going to have to operate. And we've been talking about these risks over the last at least the last 4 years, could even be the last 5 or 6 editions of the UMSA risk report. But what has come to fore is that if you've listened to how I try to link the risks together, we are for sure in a polycrisis. Now, a polycrisis just means that there are so many things that are going wrong all at the same time. They are, if they're not going wrong at the same time, they're at least going wrong in quick succession. So we have floods, we've got social unrest, we've got load shedding, we've got downtime in our communications infrastructure, we have our public sector or our public infrastructure not operating as intended. We do have public services failures. If you track riots is a strong word. If you track community dissent in marches and that sort of thing, you'll see it's the highest that it's ever been. So that's the first element that we need to consider. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you is when I get to what I think risk management should look like in the future, it is because a binary approach to risk, or a linear approach, if you like, to risk management will not get us out of this. And it's going to be you in the boardroom that's going to have to break that paradigm and reset the focus of risk management. And then, of course, it is not simple things. It's not just, you know, we have a problem with a pass rate in the matrics, or we have a problem with Uber drivers and taxis. No, these are complex and interconnected challenges that we need to drive with. And it's not just for government. It is for government or the public sector, it's for the private sector, but it hurts us as well. So it hurts the individual. So when you go back to the 6 drivers, you can now see that government has given that some good thought, because we are not talking about creating wealth. We are talking about reconstructing the basics of just having a better life, having a safer community, growing the economy. I mean, our economy is at 0, something percent. If I say 1, it may be 2, maybe 0.6%, but it's nowhere close what we need to fill up our own piggy bank. And then having said that, we have the other owners of the piggy bank that we can use not contributing to it at all. So it not just is it happening quickly and it's happening at the same time, but it is difficult stuff to deal with. It is complex. It's interconnected, because you think you fix one and then you've got a problem or an unintended consequence, as I like to call it, on some other level. And you think you fix it at government level, and then it's in the private sector or organization level or at societal level. And then, you know, when the Ukraine happened, the whole of Europe had to deal with one thing, and that was the price of energy. All of a sudden, electricity became so expensive that people started dying because they couldn't afford to keep the gas or the electricity on. And that's what they had to deal with. Compare that worry to these 9 risks. And if you consider a polycrisis as a risk, the 10 risks that South Africa face. It's across all types. It's across our social, environmental, our governance, it's technology, it is security, health, safety. I think we passed the brand and reputation one. I think we're going to just have to take that on the chin. But be that as it may, across all types of risk, at different levels, locally, regionally, and even globally, and that's with reference to how the world viewed our silence on the war in the Ukraine. So, having said all of that, where would I draw your attention to? I would for sure think, and I've said that earlier to the participants on this webinar, go do a little bit of work around go do some serious scenario planning work around the political landscape now and moving in to the elections 2024. Understand how the Ukraine and the war in Israel could play out on your dependencies on imports, exports, foreign support, and the like. Understand that very clearly. Understand your people's travel patterns, understand where you buy from, who you support, what your third-party service providers look like, both upstream and downstream. You're going to have to do work on this if you are going to be an effective risk voice in the boardroom or in any oversight committee. Understand your dependencies on the economic collapse. Those two are the key drivers in as far as the risk strategies, the risk response strategies that we have to put in place. Government has to think about what they say in the press, and we need to think about fixing the things that are important so that we can attract foreign investment again. And then the following two, national grid failure, let's sort the electricity out. And of course, let's address the failure in public infrastructure on two fronts, not just the physical demise of buildings, roads, harbors, and the like, but also service delivery. What service level is expected when one engages government from a legal perspective, from a compliance perspective, from a service delivery perspective, and the like. So those would be the four that I draw your attention to, and I'll give you a graphic that you can take away to see why I say so. For the rest of it, it's UMSA's belief that if we can actively address, because people, we cannot fix all 9 or all 10 risks. We just don't have the money, we don't have the resources, we don't have the time. We have to be careful, and it's in that light that we did the systems thinking analysis and we came up with the top 4. If we can drive solutions in that space, the digitally enabled services will be less exposed. Think about it. If we can fix our relationship with our energy crisis, Vodacom, MTN, and the like would be far better equipped to support our digital services. If we get our unemployment resolved, it will put pressure on a growing illicit economy. Our social security systems will be more dependent. So what I am trying to tell you is that driving those 4 risks and the risk response strategies quickly, aggressively, and holding people accountable to do that will mean that we inadvertently impact on the other 5 risks that we've identified. So I like always saying, it just says that we don't have to drink the whole bottle of salt water to realize that the water tastes salty. So let's focus on those. Then, just very quickly, putting it the other way around, if we don't get it right, we will ourselves get us into a humanitarian crisis. Our people, our communities will become increasingly unsafe, which means we will impact mortality. People will get hurt, people will die. We will fail to build better lives, which means the dependency on grant, the dependency on handouts will increase. And of course, you can go down the list. But it's the softer skill, or the softer elements, sorry, not softer skill, it's the softer elements that we are impacting. And what do you get when you can't keep people safe and you can't give people a meaningful living, a meaningful life, a livelihood that makes sense, you're going to get social unrest. You're going to get discontent. And then for the rest of it, I think we've said enough. So when you look at these, we are going to ultimately impact our people. And that's the message that I wanted to bring across. But let me quickly show you how we got there. This is really a really important slide, and one can use this slide. Again, I'm sure Cheryl would have shared it by now or maybe after. But when you look at this slide, this is a very rudimentary, well, actually, it wasn't that, it was really detailed, but a high level systems thinking view or a complexity thinking view that I've tried to give you. So my first point is look at the squares. Those are the 4 risk drivers. They are drivers. The circles are pivots. If we get the drivers resolved, the pivots go away and the outcomes are quite clear. So the outcomes would be clear for the drivers and the outcomes would be quite clear for the pivots, meaning we don't have to do much in that space. Addressing the 4 squares, the 4 risk drivers, will create opportunity for the pivots to address themselves. Of course, I mean, I'm oversimplifying that, but that's in essence what this model tells us. Now, take this model away to your organization and go and ask and answer the question. So how does the failure of public infrastructure impact on my organization? And use this as a population control to understand your organization in relation to the risks that the country face. It is a worthwhile exercise. Your leadership will appreciate the insights because what you're going to end up with is a cause at a national level that gives rise to a risk at your organizational level, and ask and answering the question, so what strategies do I put in place to be able to address this? Okay, so this is just talking this slide. Just a brief explanation. Anything that starts off with a circle and ends up with an arrowhead, that means let me use failure of infrastructure as an example. If you track the top line, so failure of public infrastructure has a huge impact on the collapse of the social security systems, for example. And so you can track this. And by the way, you can use the methodology to build your own systems thinking or integrated thinking model for your organization using these drivers, pivots, and of course your outcomes, by the way. So you use your performance model to say, how do these drivers and pivots impact on my organization's performance, my strategy, my targets, and my actual performance? So that was just the value of the slide that I wanted to put in. So I said I was going to share a little bit more about some of the key drivers, at least the 4 drivers. Let me show you this, and I hope you can see it nicely on your screen. But this is something that you can just go Google. I don't know if it was Eskom or whoever put this out. And I had a look at this, and I want to talk to you just a little bit. I know I'm running close to time, but very quickly, look at the yellow flash. It says blackout. Now, that would typically constitute a national grid failure. And then what this methodology implies is that 12 hours on, we won't have ATMs, fuel pumps, elevators, and so on. 24 hours on, we won't have mobile networks, internet connections, and the like, and so on, and so on, and so on. And right at the end, here, around 4 days or so, then crime will be rife and people will be hurt and mortality will increase, and all of those good things. And this is what you could very easily consider that to be the risk of a national blackout or a national grid failure. I've got a slightly different take on it. When you consider stage 8, load shedding, stage 8 by implication says you've got 12 hours on and 12 hours off. Now, if that's the case, then my take on this is that you will have a national grid failure-like behavior way before you have the national grid failure. So what I am saying to you is you should move the yellow and replace it with stage 6 to 8, because this is what's going to happen at stage 6 to 8. When you speak to Vodacom, when you speak to MTN, when you speak to the gold mines, when you speak to retail, especially fresh produce retail, all of those characteristics will start when you have a 12-hour on, 12-hour off, which is stage 8. So what is my message of this slide to you? Do not think that you will be okay to wait when the announcement comes that you will have a national grid failure. You will already have to deal with the consequences of behavior changes from a stage 6 to 8. We can see that in the south of Johannesburg. They've been out of water for the last 3 months. Water reticulation is failing in the greater Johannesburg metros. So please put some thought to this. Think about this. Hopefully there are some people in the mining industry. Can you imagine that you cannot get your 25 to 30,000 people, your shift out of your mines? I mean, yeah. So that was the one. The second one, this is the slide I promised you. This is the slide about economic collapse. Look at the two ones I labeled new. This you can, by the way, you can get off the SARB. The SARB does a very nice risk assessment every quarter. This is the one that I think it's quarter 2, that they came up with, and you will see 2 things that I've spoken about. Capital outflows, it is just huge to the point where SARB raises it as a quite likely. You'll see the likelihood is really high, and it's happening. It's in the top quadrant of near to medium term. So it's a true threat, and I would suggest you do a little bit of work understanding the impact on your organization. And then the one that's got a lesser impact and likelihood, which I tend to disagree with, because I think this was done before we had the critique around our foreign policy on our stance against Russia, but the secondary sanctions, and of course now adding to this the climate change view on South Africa, as well as the war in Israel. This could change shape, and it'll be interesting to see how SARB thinks about it. I've spoken about this. I've spoken about our rail freight, our ports, and I've spoken about road. And then you add to this the illicit economy. When you have trucks on the N3, whether it's xenophobia or whether it's just hijacking or pirating the loads, that we are in trouble, and this has a direct impact on foreign direct investment. So the last one that I just wanted to raise, there are nearly 19 million South Africans surviving on social grants. They need cash points to get to their money. Can you imagine a cyber attack? Can you imagine a national grid failure, or just a failure of public infrastructure, which is the internet service provider and the technology solutions provided to the South African government? If you can imagine that and the impact that you would have, and you can think about it across all of the 9 risks that I've just shared with you, then it takes on a very different profile. 500 hostages in a deep mine, 8 million rand lost per day, illicit economy growing to the point where there's a whole system operational in a properly functional mine. How can that be? How can that happen? And then you look at a loss per day, and you talk about this being your organization. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about is the undersea cable damage. So now we're just talking simple connectivity, internet connectivity, cell phone connectivity. Oh, and then of course, if we upset Elon Musk and we don't have access, the only country on the African continent that are not allowed access. I'm not saying that have, that are not allowed access to Starlink. So what does that say about our connectivity risk? And what does this risk then translate when we talk about my previous slide or two? So what's the call to action? I'm out of time, but I am going to leave you with this presentation. So we need to think differently about how and what we put in place to address these risks, whether we're in government or our own organization, and even in our own societies. What do we do to be able to survive this message that I've just given you? And I've given you 11 sort of thoughts around that. And the one that I just wanted to talk to about very quickly, 2 minutes, is we needed to think differently. That's point number 10. We need to think differently about how we do risk management in our organizations. We need to think differently about the value proposition of our risk register, of how we report to our boards. Will it allow for better decision making? Will it allow for addressing a polycrisis? Because if the country is in a polycrisis, I can guarantee you are in one, because those things impact you. And so, having said that, I ran out of time to animate this completely, but we need to start integrating strategy, risk, and resilience. We need to be able to have a strategic conversation that's influenced with our ability to bring the risk conversation to the table. And of course, we are not fail-proof or foolproof, if you like. There will be things that go wrong. And so part of the conversation must be to build resilience. But it will be up to you in this webinar to get your leadership to understand this, to get leadership to understand the complexity of risk, and that risk is more than just the 8 steps in the ISO 31000 or the steps in the COSO framework. It is about leadership understanding, giving directive, and giving the mandate so that the risk conversation influences vision, purpose, the relevance, our objectives, and our performance. Why am I saying this? It's because if we don't influence the setting of strategy, boards will walk away with idealistic strategies that probably won't be able to be achieved. And they will then, of course, look at risk management to come and fix that. It's too late. We have to influence strategy, and then we influence the execution of strategy. And then, of course, we have to also include in the conversation, so what if we get it wrong? What if we miss the opportunity? What then? And then to be able to have the resilience conversation around the table to talk about the agility, the effectiveness of strategy setting, execution, risk management, the robust challenges of our business continuity management, and of course then the adjustments that we have to make in our strategy, in our operations, in our risk management processes, so that we ensure continuity. And if we get that right, it's going to require us to integrate between these processes. We need to talk to the people that manage performance, that set strategy. We need to talk to the people that do risk management and our people that do business impact analysis, disaster recovery, data recovery, business continuity management, incident management. All of those people need to be part of the conversation. And I also say then, far more than what we want to worry about talking to people in governance and compliance, the old GRC sort of fad some years back. But please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's not required. I'm saying prioritize where you can make a difference. And for you to be able to do that, the onus is on you to create high-performing individuals, high-performing teams in the risk management space, and move away from the risk register thinking. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the risk register is not required. It is absolutely fundamental, but that's just one building block to be able to empower your oversight committees, your leadership with proper risk management. And if you get it right, you're going to deliver foresight to the board. You are going to give agility and proactive decision-making rather than reactive decision-making. Your company, your organization, you, the country will have better performance. And lastly, we will create value, we will protect value, and we will do that in a way that's sustainable. And that is the value proposition based on outputs. That is UMSA's message to the next generation risk professionals. I'm going to pause there. I see we've got a couple of minutes left for questions, if you like. I'm going to hand back to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christopher. Gee, that's a sobering presentation. I've got to say, it certainly focuses the mind and makes you think, well, all of us think about our businesses, and also even, well, if you're in the public sector as well, makes all of us pretty nervous, and does then also just set the scene for how important risk management is. You know, now more than ever is a time when we can get involved to add value, and how we can influence strategy and keep the awareness going, and then hopefully find some opportunities, you know, with all the whenever there's high risk and high stress, and you know, there are also opportunities. I did like at the UMSA conference listening to Vusi talking about Silicon Cape, where he was saying that, you know, there are more and more startup companies, digital companies, South African digital companies, and that would be one way to try and get foreign investment, or at least tax-paying organizations or economic growth in this country. If we still can hold on to people, and we don't have 920 or over that 920,000 South Africans overseas or pouring out, we've got to try and hold on to people, because those are the kind of the guys that are leaving are the people that create businesses and also pay taxes. So, and we need those taxes, as you said. You know, we've got a lot of people that needs to be looked after. So I think we're going to open the floor now. There was one question earlier on, Christopher, that was when you put up the bar charts with the rating of the South African risks, you know, from highest to lowest. What were those rating scales? I think it was right near the top, or one of the first slides.
It was slide number 6.
Thanks, Cheryl. So there was just one above, one or two above.
Yeah.
You can just answer that, and then we'll open the floor.
Thanks.
Now higher up, that one.
I'll talk to both of these. I think it's these, the 39s.
Yes.
And the 30th. So just
yes.
a quick methodology share. And I shouldn't have put it in, by the way. I shouldn't have, but I think it's so important to if I say I shouldn't have put it in, I'll put it in the risk report. I don't mind having it in the presentations. But to respond to the question, the methodology of doing a systems thinking or an integrated thinking approach is when you consider risks defined in the following mantra. So something happens, may happen, or happened. So the event leading to what is the consequence or impact, if you like, caused by. And so when you then use those 3 qualitative elements and you start linking those to each of the risks, so which causes are similar, which consequences are similar, which causes are actually consequences for other risks, and you do the modeling. It is a software that we use, and the more links you create, the thicker the lines become. And you would have seen that. If you Google it, you'll see how that works. So ultimately, you remove all of the finer lines and you end up with the model that I showed you. the driver, and the pivot model. And so all that this says, I think it was Ishendran that asked. So all that this means is that the political instability as a risk got the most hits from a consequence, cause, and driver point of view. And that was just the count on the hits. So here where we say impact, we looked at the cause. So political instability would be the biggest driver or the biggest create the biggest impact, all of the other risks. And similarly,
I think we've lost Christopher, or maybe I've lost connectivity.
No, I've also lost him.
biggest impact.
There we go.
Okay. So that says if we don't address the risks, then for sure these two would be the castles that will tumble first. I hope
Thanks,
I answered
Christopher. Ishandran's got his hand up. Do you want to go for it?
Hi, Christopher. Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for answering the question. Very good presentation. Thanks, BarnOwl. Christopher, I just have to ask, thanks for answering. What software were you talking about when you were mapping out these risks that you just mentioned?
So it's an Excel model that we've developed over the last, I don't know, 6 years. Causal methodology, causal, consequential, and then driver methodology. So it's in Excel, but it's based on the integrated thinking model that you get out of Porter, if you like. So yeah, no, it's a UMSA methodology that we use, and the weightings correspond with a level of impacts, and so the weightings would have been 9 because there are 9 risks. So you do a y-axis, x-axis with the selection around consequences, selection around causes. And you have to award a numeric value to each of the impacts, each of the causes, and then, of course, the relationship y to x, and then the inverse x to y. So it's a very simple integrated thinking or systems thinking analysis, if you may, using a pivot table.
Yeah. I think, well, we can look at that further, Christopher. There's interest around that, and certainly the results can be put in on the results.
Yeah,
you know, the end
absolutely.
result.
Happy to share the workings on that.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much.
Perfect.
Yeah, thanks. Petunia, you next. Go for it.
Okay, thanks for also the nice refresher presentation on this top risks in South Africa. I'm Petunia from Limpopo Treasury. Then I'm just looking at this 4 top risks that you have rated, and also reflecting back to what we have as a province as the top 10. They are almost similar, the top 4. I'm looking to say ours also talked about economy, energy, which is electricity, infrastructure. They are one of those top 4. But the slight different from our side with this South African worldwide. Our first top 1 is more of unemployment, but the other 3, they are similar because they are also on top 4. Then to say we just need to relook at how you define this unemployment and hours, and in future to see how we can match, because it's one of those top risks in Limpopo. Then my question is also on more to what role can risk management practitioner have in fighting fraud and corruption, as you have touched based on Zamas, and I'm thinking of Izinyoka, because they are impacting our economy. To say, what's your suggestion? What more can we do as the risk practitioners? Thanks.
Yeah, I'm going to. I don't know if you know, but Izinyoka was my campaign when I was still working at Eskom. I started the Izinyoka campaign, and I'll give away my age because the first ad that we ran for the Izinyoka campaign was with those, what were they called? The gladiators. I don't know if you remember that. And then they had their faces painted like snakes and, well, okay, anyway, that's it's unnecessary sharing, but it did bring back a quick, good memory. To talk about the, what can you do more? I think it's really important to understand the difference between what is a risk and what is an event. And so when we talk about zamas and we talk about those aren't risks anymore, they are happening. So we need to redefine the risk of having zamas in our space or in our province, or the construction mafia in our province, and then redefine the risk. Because your biggest challenge is that if you define the risk wrong, as we know, we can only respond to a risk by addressing its causes. If we get the risk description wrong, the risk narrative wrong, something happens leading to, caused by, controlled by. If we get it wrong, we don't change the risk, which means that you have to go back and ask yourself, what about fraud and corruption in my province? Is fraud and corruption an event? Is it already happening? And define the risk differently, because then you'll change it. But if you still think fraud and corruption is your risk, meaning that that's the cause to stuff, then you'll be partially effective. So that would be my first recommendation. My second recommendation would be that we do very specific, focused risk assessments, focusing on the impact of fraud and corruption on our strategies, and not try and do what we do as a typical risk register conversation. Have a very focused fraud and corruption risk register. And then my last one would be to understand that you will not be able to effectively assess the fraud and corruption risk doing it from a desktop, that you need to involve the right role players within your organization, people from commercial, people from projects, finance, people from HR, into your risk assessment, so that you are very clear. IT, as a matter of fact, part of that risk assessment. And that's not just a refresher of a risk register review, but a complete, very focused risk assessment around fraud and corruption, but specific to your organization strategy, or in your case, Limpopo's APP, if you like. Hope I've
And
answered your question.
SCM, Chris, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, supply chain.
Yeah,
that's got to be one of the big ones. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm still old school with procurement, but yeah, SCM. SCM is the, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Christopher. Mama Totsi, do you want your hand is up?
Oh, thanks. Good morning, and thank you, BarnOwl, for this webinar, and also a great presentation by Chris from IMSA. We really appreciate it. My question is on the risk that we have alluded, where you have highlighted in your presentation that I think we've got 10 or 9 risks. My question is, what could be the control measure to these risks? Because we have detailed the action plan in the next slide, where we have explained what could be the action plan to this risk. But my question is, what I'm trying to think of some of the control measures, but what could be the control measures facing our country in terms of this risk? Because you look at the politicians, the interference of them in the government department and also at the state-owned entities. It's not right, and we still experience such. So, but what could be the control measure in that regard? Thank you.
Just to answer your question, I think I brought up the slide. I'm not sure if I'm still sharing. Yes, I am. I don't know if you can see this slide.
We can.
So just talking to some of these, I won't talk to all 11, but there are 11 controls that we are recommending at UMSA. So if you think about my comments around economic growth, you know, when last have you heard of a review of our macro and microeconomic policies, even our fiscal policies? We need to rethink the way the international or the foreign investors and local organizations are operating in the global landscape. Our policies are outdated, they're archaic, they are not policies that allow for innovation, for creativity, they are old. So in that lies the control, to prioritize, to look at policies that impact foreign investment and to go and change them, to make us a window shop for the world, for people to want to come here, to look at our labor laws, to look at the way that we handle tax. You know, how do we tax? Can't we re-look at these so that not just will it create an attraction to invest in South Africa, but it will also then intendedly so address unemployment, address the or stop the inertia around crime and the illicit economy and the like. Invest in our education. I mean, I was going to talk about opportunities, and my question is, our education system, with how we educate our new generations, are focused on professions and of money-making professions of the past, where the future is into renewables, into all sorts of different digital elements or digital spaces, if you like, robotics and AI and those sorts of things. But I guarantee you, if you go and look at who's done those sorts of things, they are no longer in South Africa. So it's to change the way we think about the future and to align to the future. We are a country that believe that our risks of the future will be addressed with the controls of the past, with what we've done right in the past. And that's not true. And so overarching comment. But if you work through my 11, why aren't we thinking differently about how we tax SMMEs? Why aren't we thinking differently on getting SMEs to quickly register? Have you ever tried to register a SME, a one-man entrepreneurial outfit? You can't do CCs anymore, closed corporations. I mean, why not? Why can't we do those things? Why can't we make it easier for people to become entrepreneurs and to make money and to create employment? And so you can go through all 6 of these and you'll see that they are really very specific. And the last one I want to leave you with is this: build the skills gap, build skills and jobs so that we can address unemployment. We can build so much renewable energy in our country, and the private sector will focus on developing that. And in doing so, we will create a demand, we will create jobs, we will deliver a solution to our energy problems, because I firmly believe Eskom will be the post office in 5 years' time. Private green energy will at least meet the equilibrium of demand, of which Eskom can deliver and private can deliver, and it will have so many positive implications. 1, we will be able to move away from fossil to more green. 2, we'll meet climate change. 3, we'll create jobs. 4, we'll have skills built in our country that will create a sustainable solution into the future. And I'm just shooting the breeze now with you. So please have a look at these 11. Do not forget about number 10. That's probably the most important one. And I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, thanks, Christopher. Peter, do you want to go for it?
Since I've seen you many years back, thanks for arranging this, and Christopher, thanks for a very good presentation. My body was just winding down, looking forward to the weekend, and then you awoke all my aches, everything is woken again. But thanks. It's coming all the things to light. I'm with the same as my colleague with Petunia Maniaka. I'm with Limpopo Provincial Treasury and the CRO. I just want to make a comment, and if you can have an input, but I don't want to put you in a corner. But I think our biggest challenge is always to how do we really get the message through on what we're talking about and to deal with it? Because sometimes on the things we are raising in our environment becomes very difficult. And I'm going to just give you a quick example. We've got a fortunate to have a very good analyst or a computer specialist. He's got a lot of names, but he's very good at what he's doing. And about 10 years back, we started looking at the growth of COE in specifically our province, and we did a forward projection. And the projection showed us that by around 2025, we're going to run out of budget to deal with goods and services. We'll only pay our people salaries. Now, I think you've seen generally what happened in the press with the cost containment. Now, it's just unfortunate if we look back but how could we be more effective? Because we're not bringing a good message there. Because if you think about it, government has to now take, and especially, we can't rule out politics here, but you have to take very difficult stances in giving lower increases and all this kind of things. You can imagine what's going together with that. So I think that is the challenge that we sit with, is to really effectively bring our messages through and that it gets acted upon. But that was just a comment. But it's, it's sad sometimes to see, but we did identify it correctly, but it was not acted upon. Thanks, colleagues.
Yeah, so I would I'm going to just shoot the breeze quickly. I know we're over time, but just to leave you with this. The first thing that you must ask yourself is my risk message to my leadership body or my oversight body, is it given in a business language? So are you presenting the 65-page Excel-based risk register, or have you create or used your risk register to put the APP? I'm sure, Peter, you guys have an APP, the annual performance plan for the Limpopo Provincial Treasury. There will be something like that, your performance framework. Yeah?
Yes, we do. That's actually, when we look at our outcomes, that's where we derive our risks from identifying.
Yeah, absolutely. So to then ask yourself, am I positioning to the leadership a message that talks to what's important to them, and that is meeting their targets or even exceeding their targets? If you do that, great. Secondly, is my message predictive? Am I talking about the future, or am I telling them something that they already know? So just to have a risk register, I can guarantee you is 99.9% already known by everybody because they gave you the information. It is what am I doing with that information? Do I have key risk indicator framework that I've linked to my APP, to my performance framework? So not just do I want to know about my KPI, but I want to measure something that informs my KPI, that tells me if this moves, my KPI will either go up or down. Have I got that in my message? And am I using that to predict how this business language will turn out? Are you supplementing your message to your oversight or to your leadership with scenarios? If this happens, we can expect that. If that happens, we can expect this. So it is really very different to just having a risk register with red, yellows, greens, and blues, and whatever. And then the last one, have you set a risk appetite? are you in a position to visualize your risk profile in relation to your oversight committee's appetite? Because that's how you get attention. If a committee has said, this is my appetite, and you can superimpose your profile onto that, then that creates a totally different message to your oversight committee. Why? Because they are accountable for risk appetite and to make sure that the risk profile sits within appetite. So those 4 things, just to say, Mr. Kukumur, those are the things that I would think would change not just the optics of your report, but of course the message. And I think people will want to hear what you've got to say about that, and not every time tell you that your report has been taken as read.
Yeah, very good, Christopher. So yeah, I think those key risk indicators are a big thing. Brings risk management to life, and it makes it far more objective rather than subjective. And the other thing is the causes. You know, what's causing the risk, and how do we manage the causes? I mean, I can tell you now, we know what some of the causes are of these risks, and if they're documented, and then there are key risk indicators, and as you say, that then that overlays your risk appetite, of which the oversight committee or the guys at the top are accountable for. I don't know. I suppose one of the sad things in South Africa is people are meant to be accountable, but nothing seems to happen when they're not accountable. And I think that's one of the sad situations we are in at the moment. But I don't know if there are any other questions, but that's a brilliant presentation, Christopher, and some brilliant questions, and lots of food for thought. Very practical.
Thank you.
So I don't think there are any questions left. As I mentioned, we'll put this recording on the website. It'll probably be up early next week. We do a write-up. We then also do Christopher's presentation, and I know also that Christopher is open to communicating with you guys, or assists a lot of organizations through IRMSA to raise the level of awareness of risk management at the C-suite. So I think you do it admirably, Christopher, better than any of us. So
absolutely not. But thanks for the invite. Appreciate that. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah.